G'day guys, Adam Cogan here from SSW TV, and we are at NDC Sydney, and I am interviewing Edith Harbaugh. How are you, Edith?
I'm great, Adam. How are you?
Not bad. I've got plenty of questions to ask you.
I've got some answers.
Oh, great. All right. Well, you don't even know the questions yet, so that's good. Before I get on to feature flags and lots of cool things, because I'm very interested in getting features into production, and I think it's a great way of getting features in and continuous deployment and lots of cool things like that. I just wanted to, I heard that you rode across America.
That's true.
How long did that take?
The joke is the whole way. It took the whole way to take it.
Right.
Yeah.
But how many days?
It took 65 days and it's about 3,300 miles.
And was this before you launched your company, LaunchDarkly?
Yeah, this was about 10 years ago. I had decided that I really wanted to bike across country, so I did it.
Okay. And have you kept up the bike riding?
I switched after that to more running. So I was a little bit tired of biking, as you might imagine.
Yes.
So I started doing ultra long distance running races. So 50Ks, 50 miles.
Oh.
I did comrades in South Africa, and I actually did some 100-mile races.
Oh, you're actually crazy.
Yeah, so 160K.
Fantastic. I did a Tough Mudder, but that's only 20Ks.
That's fine, Adam.
Yeah, I only did it for the Facebook photos, but anyway, that was fun. I want to ask you, before I get onto your company, DevOps. I think your company and your product is very important in that space. Can you tell us, the main part of DevOps you care about?
Well, I think DevOps is really important because it used to be the old way of building software was you coded and you didn't really care about the customer because you were too removed from it. So all you cared about is checking in code. I think DevOps is getting developers to have a lot more empathy and closeness with their customers. It's the idea that your code isn't really done until it's deployed and launched and being used by actual customers. And so how LaunchDarkly fits into that is the end phase, that instead of just shipping software once, kind of hoping that nothing breaks, we allow our customers to deploy software with functionality turned off or dark, and then selectively turn it on for different populations of their users. And this really improves the software release because you can, part one, quickly turn something off if it's not going well, and part two, test features out with real users and get the real feedback without having to turn it on for everybody. And
I've just worked out from that answer why you called your company LaunchDarkly.
Dark launches.
So yeah, very nice. All right, so feature flags, or also called feature toggles, and what else are they called?
Flippers, switches,
checkboxes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a concept popularized by Martin Fowler, which is just basically if you're trying to get to more continuous deployment and agile, there's going to be bits of code that you want to be able to push to production, but have parts of them off or dark, and then selectively turn them on for different people.
Okay, so obviously I could just go into the web.config or a table and do that myself.
Yeah.
If I do that myself, just tell me all the things as a developer I'd have to do other than that.
Well, so I really encourage people to start doing it themselves first because it's really addictive. Usually why people start using a tool like LaunchDarkly is when they want to be able to do it separate from a release. So when you want to do it separately from a release, it means that you need to have some sort of thing that's separate from a deployment, which is where a service like LaunchDarkly comes in, where you can control the feature flag separate from the actual deployment. The second reason people usually come to us is if they want people other than a developer to be able to do it. For example, if you want to have some sort of UI where a product manager or a use case I heard this morning from a customer was if you have a customer success team where you want them to be able to turn features on and off. Suddenly that's something that's not something a developer can do anymore. That's something where you need a UI. And as then when you have people other than developers doing it, you also want to start to have permissions.
Right.
Around who can turn this feature on and off. And then once you have permissions, you want to have an audit trail. So all of it suddenly becomes a lot of stuff, and that's why we call ourselves a feature management platform, more than just the simple if statement of the switch. So that's what we really do is we manage.
And if I make a table and do all this, and I've kind of got a little bit of a framework, how much pain is it to go from that to switch over to LaunchDarkly?
You mean in terms of if you wanted to build a LaunchDarkly, or if you wanted to migrate to us?
If I want to migrate to you.
It's really easy. We've had customers that have done it in a day or two.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
They really like it because our best customers, well, I love all our customers, but we get a lot of people who've built some sort of homebrew solution,
yes,
and then realize how much overhead there is in maintaining a homebrew solution. Do you have homebrew here in Australia?
We do homebrew, yes.
Yeah.
We don't need it because we have such good beer here anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so LaunchDarkly, you started with a couple of guys. I think you have a partner?
Yeah, I started it with my co-founder, John Codemel, who's ex-Atlassian and who I went to college with.
Ah, Atlassian.
Yeah.
He's Aussie?
He's an American, so we went to college in California together.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And so you've gone from a couple of people. I think last year when you came here, there was about half a dozen or 8 people or something?
We were 8 people when I came here last July.
And what are you now?
We're in the 20s. So it's cool. We keep growing because we keep getting more customers, and we have now a fuller sales and marketing team and more developers and more support to grow with our customer base.
Okay. So if I have, say, an Angular application and I want to implement LaunchDarkly, do you develop specific solutions for Angular, React, etc.? And do I just pull in a package, or what's involved?
So we have a couple JavaScript SDKs, and then people have actually written wrappers in particular for React and Angular to make it even easier. For example, if you want to do a single page app, which is actually quite cool because you can, with that, update features on the fly without having to refresh the browser. Okay.
So with your company, when you started it, did you kind of, are you familiar with big, hairy, audacious goals? Yep. So did you have a big goal that you wanted to do, or you just wanted to start and see if you got a few customers?
I kind of broke it down into steps. So starting the company was definitely a big leap of faith. My co-founder left a very steady job at Atlassian. He was a team lead, and he'd started Atlassian Marketplace. I had been at TripIt and Concur. So I kind of broke it down into the first year in terms of John building the product and me trying to get our first 10 customers. And I have a saying that the first 10 customers are the hardest because you're an unknown startup in an unknown market, and if there was any other solution, people would probably buy that. But it gets easier as you go along. So the goal I set myself is get the first 10 customers, then get 100 customers, then get 1,000.
Okay, so you've solved the software side of things, and now it's just a matter of implementing it. What are the tips you have for developers once they, obviously most developers don't develop with feature flags, they just develop. They go through testing and they go into deployment. What are the tips you give developers to do this right?
The tip I use, just if you've never used feature flagging, is to ease into it. If you've never feature flagged anything, maybe try it with a couple redesigns or a couple major system changes that you're nervous about. And that's just to give you a comfort level that feature levels can work and to start to build processes around that. What we normally see is that once people start feature flagging, it's pretty addictive. People say in their postmortems, if we'd had a feature flag and something breaks, I could turn it off. Like a great example is something's not going well in the field, it's the weekend, all the developers are home. The old way of doing that without a feature flag is that you call up all the developers and say, hey, you gotta come back from Bondi Beach or wherever you're having a beer and work on this over the weekend. Nobody really likes that. If you feature flagged it, what you could say is, hey, this is going poorly. I'm gonna turn this feature off for the weekend, and on Monday, when everybody's back in the office refreshed, let's start working on this. So that's how people kind of ease into feature flagging, is they're like, hey, this actually really helps make my life a lot easier. And then they're a lot more eager to incorporate more feature flagging into their development practices.
Wow. Have you ever had it so that when errors are happening, they actually automatically turn off a feature?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, so we actually have an integration with New Relic that can do it. It's pretty cool.
Right.
It's basically AI for deployment.
So when developers start doing this, is it important that they start doing feature branching, and as they take a branch, they consider at that point that they add a flag at that?
Everybody's a little different. I know some people who do it actually for every pull request.
That's a lot of feature flags.
Yep. And I know some people who do it at a much higher level of abstraction at just a total functional area. I know some people who do it at the microservice level. My best advice is to do it at a level that you as a software org are comfortable with, and that you can communicate to other teams about what's happening and coordinate around.
Okay. Have you seen anybody in feature flag hell?
I've seen people in feature flag hell if they don't use LaunchDarkly. Usually what happens is people use them and they don't document them. And so what you'll have is you'll have a lot of very brittle, stale code, and it's undocumented, and people don't really understand what these feature flags are for. And when they try to remove them, it can actually have very dangerous consequences, because they're actually gating some behavior that needs to be gated, or you have a stale code branch that when you do remove it, suddenly conflicts with everything else. So feature flag hell, I'd say, is when you don't have a system like a LaunchDarkly and you just have a lot of undocumented technical debt.
Right, okay. What's the worst thing that's ever happened with feature flags?
The worst thing, well, there was a public story about, I wrote an article for InfoQ about Knight Capital, where they had a stale feature flag and they lost about 500 million USD in about 4 hours.
What's a stale feature flag?
So they had a feature flag that they had built to turn something on in staging so they could test out some high volume trading on the stocks. And it wasn't documented. And when they accidentally turned it on in production, the system thought, oh, let's just start trading a lot of stocks. And
wow. I bet that guy lost his job.
Well, you know, there's a lot of chain of blame there.
So what was the feature flag called?
Powder peg.
Powder peg.
Yeah.
And the guy just turned it on. See.
Somebody turned it on.
Great. Oh, awesome. Oh, all right. Now, do you have any advice for users? Like, do you take the permissions off the developers for turning it on? Or like, what advice do you have for doing this well?
It's really interesting. So LaunchDarkly has a lot of customers now, and what we see is that if people are new to feature flags, usually they're very nervous and they say, of course, this is a developer-only thing. After they've been using it for a couple months, they'll get a lot more confident. And suddenly then they realize that, hey, it would actually make my life a lot easier if I could give this rights to turn some flags to product managers or to customer success. Because that means if it's over a weekend and something is not doing well, customer success can turn it off rather than me. So usually there's kind of an evolution where it really starts off as a DevOps tool and then it becomes a whole company function of being able to really control code.
Okay. So let's move on to testers. Testers typically, you deploy to staging, they test, and then you deploy to production. We deploy to production. Does the tester just turn on the feature and then test it? Like, how do you interact with testers?
So every company is a little bit different. My thought is that you should try to get to production as quickly as possible. So usually what people do is they do some sort of quick sanity check in staging, and then they launch the feature off for everybody in production, and then start slowly turning on just for the QA primarily, and that way QA can verify it in production before it gets turned on for everybody else. This is actually very valuable because your staging environment is never going to be the same as your production.
Yep, and the data's different?
The data's different, the behavior's different. So if you can actually do your testing in production with QA only doing it, that's actually a much better test than staging. I actually wrote in an article called Kill Your Staging Server, which kind of imagines a world where you get rid of staging entirely. In practice, though, most people do, as I said, do some sort of sanity check on stage before they go to prod.
But do you have any customers without a staging server?
Yes.
Right. Now, what do ops guys, assuming you've met some pretty serious ops guys, what do they say when they finally twig, hey, we're testing in production?
Well, the saying I heard, and I didn't make this up, somebody else did, is everybody tests in production. Sometimes you have a separate testing environment too. Like the old way of just pushing everything to production and crossing your fingers is actually incredibly dangerous. You know, because you're not really doing any sanity checks there, you're just assuming that the tests you ran in staging or QA are valid. And anybody who's been in software for a long time knows that the real world cannot be completely controlled. There's always going to be a use case or some edge cases that you just couldn't see earlier.
That's interesting. Always testing in production.
Well, some people are lucky enough to have a separate testing environment.
Okay, so what about sunsetting features? Like, do you have any advice around getting rid of old stuff?
Yes, do it.
With feature flags?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the nice things about feature flags is you can also cleanly sunset old features, and you can see if a feature is being used or not. Old features are actually very expensive. You know, when I was at various companies, you know, we'd have to build up test suites around them. You'd have to do browser compatibility checks around them. You'd have to make sure they worked with your new features. So you think that it's not costing you time and money, but it is to have this old feature sitting around that's not used much. So sunsetting a feature is actually one of the best things you could do to increase your velocity.
So grab the old feature, put it behind a feature flag and turn it off.
Yep. Or actually, I heard another great use case. I love coming to NDC, by the way, because I get to meet so many customers in person. They used feature flags to try to debug something. Because they were seeing this unexpected behavior, and they started kind of throwing feature flags on different parts of the system and turning things off so they could isolate what part of the code base was causing that issue.
Okay. A/B testing. Do you have features in there for A/B testing?
We do. So some people do use this for A/B testing. There's features that are backend features that people want to validate. For example, if you have a 2-step versus a 4-step checkout flow,
yep.
That's a good use case that you could test with us. We also have people who test different search algorithms or just different behaviors.
Okay. And you have nice reports for all that?
We do.
What about testing load?
That's another great use case for us. We have an integration with New Relic.
Yes.
And with that, you can see if a new feature is actually causing a performance impact. Something I learned when I worked with a Yammer product manager is that most features are slower when they're new. So you can actually see a performance drop with a new feature that you don't really realize.
Is there any negatives to all this feature flags? Like, am I going to have my code, like, do I end up with quite a bit of technical debt with if then else's everywhere scattered through my code?
I think you do if you don't think about why you're feature flagging. So I gave a talk here about feature flags. My 3 biggest tips were think about the life cycle of a feature flag. Like, think about why you're putting it in and when you're going to remove it. And build that in from the very beginning so that you don't end up littered with feature flags. My second one was to lock down permissions on feature flags so that you don't have people turning a feature flag that they shouldn't. And the third kind of goes along with the first. The first one was think about the life cycle. The third was be ruthless about cleaning up old feature flags.
Right. Awesome. So I'd just like to ask, how do you make sure you are getting rid of old feature flags? Like, what system can you use?
So my company, LaunchDarkly, has some help there. We'll tell you when a flag has been called by 100% or 0% of users.
Oh, right.
Because that's a tip that it's time to remove it.
Yeah.
I talked to a customer, and they actually had an explicit phase in their development cycle. They called it tidying, which I loved. So they had, building, deploying, launching, tidying, which was pulling out all the feature flags, or sometimes if you have a dud of a feature, just pulling out the feature itself.
Okay. So I'd like to finish off by just finding out what are some of the big things you still want to nail that you haven't nailed yet, some great features or changes to the practices?
I think you touched on it at the end. I see a new world where as soon as a developer has finished a piece of code, it can be automatically deployed off and then start rolling out to different users. So if you've committed something and it passed unit tests, why can't it just start going out to 10% of the population, or maybe just to your QA immediately?
Getting rid of QA and just having...
well, no, so going out to your QA, going out to whoever you define as the next step.
So are they the beta customers, QA?
It could be beta customers or it could be QA. It could be whoever you want, but just automating that so that code just moves a lot faster with more velocity.
And is that something you are hoping to ship one day?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's something our customers are asking for. The way they put it is if we have unshipped code, that's basically inventory.
Right. Oh, yeah, it is. Yes, and then obviously developers just want their code used.
Yeah, so if you have a lot of stuff that hasn't been deployed, you're not getting feedback on it, you're not getting business value on it. In addition, it's its own kind of technical debt because all your other developers are building stuff that could conflict with that. Right. So you really want to get code out to the world as quickly as possible.
Well, it's been a fascinating chat. Do you have any big bike rides or exercise plans ahead?
My biggest plan right now is just to go back to the States, but I really enjoyed coming to Sydney. We have a lot of Australian customers and it's great to see them in person.
Oh, awesome. Well, it's been lovely chatting with you. This is Adam Cogan signing off for SSW TV.